I'll just go ahead and jump right into our panel introduction. I'm excited about this opportunity to have a great conversation with our panelists. They are thought leaders and experts, and understand their thoughts as we delve into the future of hospitality design in the wake of COVID-19 and beyond. We have much to talk about given the current pandemic and additional threats that that are to definitely be considered as an extension, such as air quality and social adaptations, space planning, wellness. So I'm excited that you guys are able to join us as we see how this pandemic will influence hospitality design and its offerings. Just so you know, our panelists will be raising their hands, when they want to speak, if they have a question or if they want to jump in and give some additional information. Attendees, this does not mean to stop. It does not mean we're raising the roof. It just means that it's our little signal to talk between us as we have this virtual way, since we're not in person, to kind of read each other as well as we'd like. So just so you know, there's no reason to kind of feel any type of way if you see a hand go up as you're watching us. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce our lovely panel of experts. I'll start with myself, Ms. Denaye Hinds. I am a sustainable tourism expert and curator of conversations. I'm the managing director of my own company, Just the TAAD LLC, and we focus on discussing and delivering sustainability for the hospitality, tourism, and MICE industries. We also have Mr. Tim Peck, who you're unable to see his beautiful face right now, but you will hear his lovely voice soon. He's an architect and designer and chairman of OBMI International. They are a global architecture and master planning firm who specializes in high-end resort and residential design throughout the globe. We also have Ms. Vivianne Garcia-Tunon, an amazing spa creator and owner of Wonderflower, also a good friend of mine as well. And she has a spa and wellness consultancy, which has worked stretching the globe from Asia, Middle East, Central America, all the way through to the Caribbean. And she is a wonderful expert, and we're glad to have her. Thank you, Vivianne, for joining us. And last but certainly not least, we have Mr. James Lehouiller, an interior designer and academic overachiever, I hear. Fun fact, he has an honorary doctorate from Johnson & Wales, which I love that university. I actually guest lecture there most times when I am in Miami and able to do so. He is the managing director and CEO of DiLeonardo. It is a hospitality-focused interior design company. So we're excited to have all of our experts here and giving us their insight and expertise during this time as we look at COVID-19 and how it's changing the design world, specifically for hospitality. So we're going to get started with our first question. We know that COVID has already changed our lives in unimagined ways, and I'm sure all of you know this. It's been an interesting journey these past few months. Who would have thought that in January we would have been here where we are now, 4 months later, socially and economically. And we are going to have the opportunity to drill down now into some design details within this session. But initially, I want to ask our panelists, what is your high-level response to how the design industry is reacting to COVID? And Tim, we'll start with you as you are lead us all together for this amazing panel. Thank you. We'd love to hear your thoughts on high level.
Thanks very much, Denaye. And again, apologies for not being there visually in person. Just a technical glitch this morning with my camera. And so you won't be able to see me waving, but hey-ho. Anyway, it isn't the first time in history that cities and indeed buildings have had to be reimagined or redesigned in response to disease. If we go back in history and we look at cholera and the understanding of transmission of cholera and how that led to the wonderful city of Paris that you see. Haussmann basically redesigned Paris in the 1800s to address the cholera epidemics they've been having in the early 1800s. And again, London reconfigured its infrastructure in the wake of the 1854 cholera epidemic. In the 19th century, we saw New York's reaction to the squalid conditions of tenement housing. So it's been the catalyst to significant change in our urban environment over the years. And it's really up to us as architects and design professionals. We have an obligation to reimagine this post-COVID future. God, don't we look forward to the concept of post-COVID? Solving these immediate tangible problems, but also reacting to a number of more intangible issues that have arisen through the process. So how has working from home led to a different balance in appreciation of the qualities of life? And I think, you feel that on a very personal level. The ability to slow down and appreciate Mother Earth. It's a new appreciation of the importance of light, space, and safety, and the appreciation of friends, family, and neighbors, and all of that sort of social interaction that we used to take for granted. And another issue, which I think we have to overlay on this, is the creation of a more equitable world where space and safety are not just the privilege of the wealthy. We've seen how COVID has impacted certain kind of social groups which are related to kind of density of living. So we have to weave all of this and the psychology and the emotional well-being of the individual into our new post-COVID world.
Tim, and I appreciate some of the history that you shared with us, and it's definitely going to be looking forward to a post-COVID-19 world. And the great thing is that we have the ability to recreate and reinvent, right, in this downtime, and think about some innovations. So Vivianne, I'd love to hear your perspective on what you think, and then James, please do follow up from an interior design standpoint of how your high level thoughts on.
Well, I hope as a wellness professional, my ask and my dream is that this epidemic turns into a wellness revolution, right? I think more than ever, people need to be able to take agency over their own health. We have to be able to fix the biology in order to solve this problem. And the design community needs to look at everything from a very holistic perspective as to how wellness and spa integrates into food and beverage and in all the different areas of the hotel. It can no longer be seen in silos. I've seen wellness actually it's obviously been very popular in the past 10 years, but it's truly coming to the forefront at this moment. And I think hoteliers and owners need to see wellness as an integral part of their facilities, not just as a commodity and a revenue producing department. We can actually make a change and a difference in somebody's lives when they come and have a massage or de-stress. So I think it's great for the future.
Thank you, Vivianne. James, I'd love to hear.
Well, those two are tough to follow up with those eloquent responses, but I think at the end of the day, we're the most successful hotels we see is about the social aspect and the community building. And while we have to figure out ways to create physical distance, I think one of the organizers said that's really one of the what's really required. Social distancing is what we're all chafing and more importantly eager to get back to. And I think our properties and destinations can really be a hopeful kind of respite and as we look forward and to try to connect in the future. And the challenges is how we do that in a safe and hospitable way.
Is something that we all are going to be looking at. And much like Vivianne mentioned in terms of the working in silos, that will be a thing of the past, this holistic approach and us being able to get back to connecting together from a design standpoint, I think will really be great. That integrative design process from the onset of things will really change how we look at hospitality design moving forward. Okay, so now as we move into more of the topic of our session in terms of how COVID will change hospitality design, what are some big picture changes that we're start seeing in the industry? Tim, I'll leave with you.
It's interesting. I think there are short-term, sort of medium-term and long-term we have to have a look at. And obviously we'll be talking through that as we get into the session today. Interesting, Ian Schrager had made a comment recently about his vision of the long-term changes, and to quote it, my personal view is that we'll see an absolute return to normal. There's not been one crisis where there hasn't been a return to normalcy. We're wired in a certain way, we're rising, and I don't think we're going to change that. So it's an interesting viewpoint. Obviously, as I say, we will get into a lot of the short-term fixes. There are a lot of the, distancing is an issue that we have to address until we can find a means of of allowing more direct physical contact. So I think, but again, it's interesting to hear some of the longer term views that yeah, we will get back to a social life. That's what we need.
I agree. Humans, we have that innate need to act and be social, and much of this is tied to our experiences with others. And understanding that how will this change in the age of social distancing or even physical distancing as we look at this? Vivianne, I'd love to hear you.
Well, I am personally very passionate about Dan work. He actually studies the blue zones of the world. And apart from healthy diet and exercise, one of the common denominators for these areas is and coming together. So, like Tim mentioned, I don't think that will stop anytime soon. It's just the design needs to be congruent to allow for that community to happen in a safe way. I think nature will take center stage, and we are going to spend a lot more time outside, which is the safest way to be able to decrease the amount of virus in these.
So, Tim, you mentioned, in our conversations before, some excerpts from the book, A Brief History of Mankind, in terms of family and community. Would you mind sharing some of that insight with us?
But I mean, obviously, it's *Sapiens*, which is an amazing book, Yuval Harari, and he talks about family and community and how those sorts of relationships bring on kind of the associated doses of serotonin, dopamine, and oxytocin, and those are really what generate this wonderful sensation of happiness. So we have this kind of fundamental need for social interaction, and we've obviously been all living this life of Zoom, but this virtual world isn't personal enough. It just doesn't give us that physical, really personal interaction that we need. So, and again, obviously a lot of our focus in hospitality is in the luxury sector, and the luxury sector needs has been driven by personal attention and concierge service. So how much of this can still be automated and still be seen as personal? So, and also overlaid on that, we're all seeking this kind of meaningful life, which can be translated in a variety of forms for the individual. And in our design focus in the recent past, it's led for this search for transformational experiences within the travel industry, and that hasn't gone away. I mean, that will reemerge. So. Yep, in the short term, people are going to be apprehensive, and it'll be our responsibility to design safe environments, and our environments that address these issues with a level of responsibility to health and safety, but providing that level of relaxed ambience and social interaction that Ian Schrager kind of references, the broader response to kind of that experiential travel.
In terms, so that's the luxury perspective. James, I'd love to hear your ideas. I know you work in all sectors, urban and business as well. How do you feel that service will change there in terms of the more urban hotels and hospitality, and looking at attention to detail and service? Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's I think the urban settings are a little bit more challenging. We see the outbreaks in urban centers around the world, so with the density, there's a higher risk. I think on the luxury level, it's going to be similar. From a point of view, the service will still be there. I think the challenge is how do you not make it transactional. As you move down the tiers of properties, it's more transactional versus service focused. So as we all know that technology is developed and evolved, and the brands have been taking the lead on this. We see that being implemented more. It's just a logical progression. But as we've talked about, I read an article recently that this is kind of this event is like the great accelerator. Trends and declines are going to be pushed quicker. And I think technology is going to be pushed into properties from a necessity, a safety perspective along the way. So our challenge is, as designers and operators, is how do you make it still service focused? but also integrate the technology through. So more technology is probably one of the key things to limit contact, but also provide service.
I agree. And that brings me to a point, and Vivianne, I love what you mentioned, James, about more transactional and just that whole thought process, because Vivianne, you made a point in a discussion that we were having about no longer spa and wellness no longer just being a commodity, right? And not just another revenue producing department. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And also echoing the sentiments that James mentioned about technology. You've always said that the hospitality world is a little bit behind in technology and our need to kind of integrate technology more. Please start with the whole revenue producing comment, and take us more into your thoughts on technology and how it's pairing with how we need it to pair more.
I think, well, from my personal perspective in regards to technology and the spa, it's the one area where I am a champion for high touch and low tech. The way I do see technology being used in the wellness aspects is, that anticipatory wellness, that anticipatory service. So it's whether it's sending surveys or sending pre-arrival notifications where you could actually understand because how the guest wants your experience to be, right? Everybody has very different feelings in regards to how they want to be treated. Everybody has a different perspective as to how the virus should be handled. But I think when it comes to the luxury segment, what we do really well is creating bespoke experiences. I think from that pre-arrival and being understanding of how each single guest wants to feel is how we'll be able to customize the experience and attract, obviously, the guests to come back to the spa and have a massage or have.
Touch on your thoughts about new stream, but how you see it integrating a lot more into the design.
Yeah, as I previously mentioned, there is proven scientific fact to the benefit of massage from Johns Hopkins University, from the Touch Research Institute. This is not woo-woo, it's fact that massage lowers your blood pressure, decreases metabolic syndrome, it increases your T-cell production in your immune system. So it is something that it should be incorporated into somebody's daily life, much to how they do it in Europe and even in Thailand, where it's just part of your well-being routine to get these different services. It's not just going to the spa to get a massage and then I leave. And I think the industry as a whole, apart from the design, will have to look at the design of the programming and the practitioners that they're hiring. What are their qualifications? We've been talking a lot about sanitation in the industry. Myself, I'm a Florida licensed massage therapist, and we are ruled under the Department of Health. So many of the UV lights and the full spectrum cleaners that people are speaking about, I've been using them for over 20 years. So I'm hoping that will permeate throughout the entire world, that it's, spa is very important, that we're very, very clean and thoughtful of guests. And that's always been the case from day one, not just today.
I like that. We're going to be going back into the workforce to keep, hospitality going, because again, at the end of the day, we built these amazing places for people to experience. And, the CEO of OBMI always said that we're designers of lifestyles, right? So we need to keep, that person in mind when we're designing, as well as not just the guests, but also those who are doing the serving. So let's get into some of the short-term, low-hanging fruit, if you will, in terms of design solutions. What are they for the hospitality industry? Tim, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I think and again, part of the challenge is actually going to be making some of these short-term things almost a celebration for the guest, so that something that it is not, doesn't feel like it's an accommodation to the virus, but it's actually something which somehow we can provide in a way that enhances the experience. And again, so looking at it, so the whole sort of check-in process, you think through that, and suddenly all of those pin pads, elevator buttons, interactive kiosks, touchscreen computers are the modern equivalent of the kind of vermin-covered rats during the bubonic plague. I mean, unfortunately, obviously now everyone, pulls back in fear. So, and between the time you arrive at the front door and the time you get to the hotel room, you've probably touched 5 to 10 different surfaces, including the front door handle, the check-in desk, the pen, the sign-in sheet, the room key, the elevator up button, and the floor button to within the elevator, and the door to the room. So, and that's even before you get inside the room, and we have to deal with the room issues. In practical terms, this could involve a pre-check-in on your phone, obviously perhaps using a camera to verify your identity on arrival, maybe some thermal imaging to detect your temperature, maybe another way of kind of celebrating. You kind of celebrate the safety aspect with the temperature check. And through your phone and through your pre-check-in, you will be routed to an elevator that will automatically take you to your room, perhaps with the assistance of a barcode. And then your phone will access the room with a door that will automatically open on your arrival with pressing the button on the phone. So, I mean, all of these are technologies that exist at the moment and just need adaptation. So I think the technologies that work. And then we get into a little bit more depth within the room itself. And I know James will have a lot to say on this, but obviously, that surfaces are a real challenge. We've got, the virus lives on metal doorknobs and glass and ceramics for 5 days, wood furniture for 4 days, elevator buttons, for plastics for a couple of days. So we're going to have to get around those issues. Obviously, we'll touch on cleaning, but voice activation, I think, is going to become far more active, far more prevalent in how you make your room function, whether that be the lighting, the television. Obviously, the rooms, they're getting rid of all accessories. The pens and paper that you have in your room, unfortunately, is not going to be there anymore. So a bunch of issues that are fairly easily addressed. I think I'll step off there. Some of the more,
Yes, James, if you could please give us some more insight from an interior design perspective in terms of in-room changes that we might be seeing in terms of design post-COVID-19 or even.
Well, I think there's, Tim's kind of hit it on the head. I mean, there's definitely surfaces that retain the virus longer. I think, the progression of the room design over the past, 4 or 5 years has been a lot cleaner. Even if you think back to the floral, vibrant colored, I think of South Florida kind of spreads that are on the thing, which immediately I go into the room, I pull off and throw into the corner with the throw pillows because I'm a bit of a germaphobe already. So I think the rooms have already been going in that direction with removal and putting hard surfaces in and with LVT and things along those lines. So fortunately, we've started the progression in that way. I do think that, the short-term fixes from a design perspective are somewhat limited. It's more, I think, from a systems perspective with, the MEP systems and the filtering, indigo lighting, in the rooms, all those sorts of are which can be integrated in. There are definitely surfaces that are out there that are, which we can look at many touch points, as said, from when you leave the car to when you get to the room, is how do you try to minimize those down and possibly making adjustments along the way on your path to your room. So those are some of the things I would say. I think service is going to be a big factor of this. Really, at the end of the day, brand is about trust, and how the hotels provide that trust and security is going to be critical. We have to give the feeling of that it's the security, the safety, and the cleanliness. It not only is being done operationally, but also looks that way as well. It looks clean, it feels clean, and then we're providing a structure to allow the team and the operational staff to be successful with it.
Yeah, I did, I've seen the question coming up about the issues of back of house and how to address that in giving the public confidence in terms of cleanliness. I think almost nowadays cleanliness has to become more of a kind of visible cultural issue. And becomes part of the rituals, and the hotels have to somehow be able to convey that through to the guests. So to some extent, maybe part of it is bringing some of the kind of back of house, front of house, and making it a little bit more visible, so that you actually again sell. I mean, obviously we've been seeing open kitchens for years in terms of the restaurant design, but it's almost somehow making some of the back of house much more transparent to the guest, and actually creating this culture of cleanliness so that it really is a ritual in our life. I mean, if you think to other cultures and how they celebrate cleansing, you've got the bathing rituals in Japanese culture. You've got, in the Muslim world, there's washing your hands and feet before prayer. You've got the Hindu world with the removal of shoes and kind of washing hands as a mark of respect to the house and honor its cleanliness and purity. So I think somehow the hotels have to be able to convey that sense of cleanliness to their guests so that it becomes much more apparent and it becomes a cultural issue. I know, Marriott and many of the airlines have been using kind of electrostatic spraying for disinfecting. I know Vivianne from previous conversations is not so excited about that, but I'm sure she'll jump in. Obviously, in China, they're using UVC emitting robots. And again, what they've been talking about is to sanitize spaces. So, okay, maybe your cleansing robot, has a wander around the lot, becomes something that, the guest sees so that it sort of becomes part of the cleansing celebration process. Obviously not cleansing with its, UVC at the time, but it's just showing that this is part of the process that you're using. So I think there are ways, of celebrating cleanliness in a slightly different way.
Yeah, I agree. And I like that, bringing culture into how we're going to move forward with this. And Vivianne, I know you have some insight on that, especially as it relates to rituals. Please give us your thoughts.
Just to backtrack a little bit, I do, think at the moment the guests are hypersensitized as to their environments. Normally I walk into a spa, and if I walk into a steam room and I see delamination in the cabin, or I see rust coming out of the steam, or there's white mold in the tile, many guests would not notice that previously. But now, it's that idea that how you do one thing is how you do everything. From the design perspective, I think it'll help push when you're trying to buy materials that are great for waterproofing and good equipment that is made for these cabins. I think it'll be easier to push through those elements through the design process, as again, it's going to be so important that these facilities are in tip-top shape throughout, not just the treatment room, but also the steam room and the saunas. In regards to rituals, I see, offering masks that are infused in essential oils. And, personally, all of my projects, one of the rituals that we put together for the therapist is the cleansing of the hand and the feet before your treatment, which is really to take the stress away. You've just come from the street, to be able to try to relax you before we start the body work. But I think all those cleansing rituals that the spa industry has been using will come to the forefront. Maybe we'll spend more time. There'll be different essential oils that'll be added. There'll be more explanation from the therapist as to what we're doing during the treatment, just to make them.
So let's look at if there will be fundamental changes to the actual hotel room. Lisa, in our chat, she mentions the previous session, CBRE does not feel that design will change. And we're talking right now about fundamental changes specifically to the design of the hotel room. Do you guys agree with this? Or will there be changes in less of a physical design or more on how existing space is being utilized? So in answering that question of fundamental changes to the hotel room, will it be actual change or changes in the way in which the space is being utilized?
Jump in here. One of the things that we were looking at even before COVID, and I think it becomes perhaps even more applicable now, is obviously in the recent past, there has been a push to make the hotel rooms smaller, particularly in urban environments, and the social spaces larger. And this has been really to address the millennial traveler and their kind of need for socialization, which obviously has been the big challenge at the moment. And that has even started to integrate into the concept of co-working and co-living and bringing that into the hospitality project. And obviously that's at the moment, under the current environment, somewhat of an anathema. So we've been looking at ways of actually reversing some of this change and actually dedicating more space to the private spaces and to the rooms and actually making the rooms easily transformable. So with a kind of flexible furniture arrangements, you can allow the room to be transformed at various times of the day to accommodate the functions of sleeping, obviously, of living, of dining, a working environment, maybe your workout space, or possibly even small group socializing, and that's all within the same room with just a creative rearrangement of within the space. Interestingly, I mean, I just personally just purchased a Yotel apartment in Park City, and within that have seen just how they've added a phenomenal level of flexibility into a relatively small space. In their purpose was really fitting more kind of accommodation within the space, but you got tables appearing from walls everywhere and beds and God knows what else. But it actually just does allow for a very flexible use of a very small space. So I think it's going to take different levels of imagination now to try and create those.
I agree. James, do you have any insight or anything to add?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, we've been dealing with a guest room is a box or oblong or whatever shapes that might come out. So I mean, we still have 4 walls, a ceiling, and a floor, and a bathroom. And I think at the end of the day, how do we use good design to make the room flexible? And I think that's, really Tim kind of hit the nail on the head with that, is, making the rooms flexible. I think there's some sort of escalation to move for rooms to be really small as we kind of slice into markets in lower segments. And, I stayed in a property in New York. It was, I might have had enough room to walk around my rollie and go in the bathroom and walk out. I think there's room escalation on the other side in the luxury sector where, you're pushing 65 to 70 square meters in some of these overseas properties, which for me feels a little decadent and irresponsible. I'm not sure if that's the way forward. How do you manage the middle? So rooms need to be flexible. I do think that that private space, as Tim has referenced, is really important. We're doing a 219 square foot room in a small resort town here in the States, and the room feels good. We moved the bathroom out. It has flexibility. And I think that's what needs to be done as we, giving thoughtful design for flexibility throughout the space. I saw one of the chats in the comment about meeting space. How do we get back to meetings? That's a big revenue generator. That's a connectivity. We normally be at a conference talking about this stuff. We have a property we're doing in Las Vegas is massive meeting space, but it's all flexible, with movable partitions and trying to create the ability to get in smaller groups, but also make it larger when the environment is better, so sectioning things off, keeping your bubble smaller when you can, is really important. So thoughtful design is really going to be really important as you look at the future of the planning and the flexibility of property.
And I think that's a good point, because there were some questions about whether or not, these changes in design will be around 3 more years, and having that flexibility and being able to open and close spaces kind of speaks to that. You don't want to just go full-fledged into one specific area. There will be different designs and different segments as we have different levels of hospitality.
Totally different appreciation.
Well, you probably I'll do one side, I'll do the inside. I think from a point of view of cost, I think it's always a prioritization, right? You look at the numbers, we're always trying to maximize the front of house space to make the greatest impact for the guest. I don't think it's going to be a huge cost from a plan of, trying to create flexibility. That for me is just being thoughtful with the design. When we start getting into systems and how, traffic flow and traffic patterns through hotels, those are not, those are bigger decisions, right? And which Tim can probably speak to. One thing I did forget to mention before, which is, great signage is critical. If we don't have to interact and we can go to the spaces we need to quickly, efficiently. I'm very lazy when I go to a hotel. I don't like to ask questions. I just like to go where I want to go. And great signage is another important part of that journey, right? It's not a technology thing. It's just great signage. And that's a low-hanging fruit for properties to do now as well. But Tim can probably speak to systems and all the back of house and the structure.
The flexibility doesn't necessarily, flexibility is a lot of it's about creativity and actually coming up with solutions that doesn't necessarily have to be a much larger room to accommodate a degree of flexibility. It just has to be designed in a way which is perhaps a little bit more creative in the approach and with a different kind of mindset. I mean, yeah, there may be some additional costs if you've got, you're having to use a bit of technology in there to create the flexibility. But you're also adding value to the product. So you're creating something which is marketable in a slightly different way from your normal run-of-the-mill hotel room. So I think you're offering a different environment. There was another comment I saw earlier on. Oh yes, the idea of open corridors coming back into vogue again. And again,
mentioned that. Then James will talk patterns throughout. Will open corridors be making a comeback?
Well, obviously we do a lot of work in the kind of more tropical environments. Our roots are in the Caribbean region, and we're obviously doing a lot of work in the Middle East and those sorts of environments. And where we can, we'll use open corridors. I mean, it makes sense, and again, it's much more of a connection with it has to be done in a way where you're capturing the breeze where you can and creatively using it to add to the environment. So in a way that actually connects you to your to the landscape. So it has to be done in a way that doesn't feel or experience through the process. So yeah, I don't think it ever went away in where you can use it appropriately.
Yeah. We have a question from Angelique. James, I know you have thoughts on this. What do you think will be the conclusion for the choice of materials in the future? Which expectations will they have to fulfill, carpet versus LVT? James, I know you have some thoughts on materials. Could you share that with us? And Nikhil, I see your question, and Prem, I'll get to that.
Yeah, I think, once again, I think we're in a kind of a short term. It feels like a marathon, but we're in a sprint to get beyond this virus with a vaccine. And so while we're building new properties, how do we, create properties that are prepared for the future? So, first of all, I think there's natural materials like copper, has antimicrobial components already to it. I also think there's also there's different elements we can put from a point of view. We don't want to be completely sterile. Right, that wouldn't be a hospitable environment where we're just using steel and surfaces that are very easily clean. The virus dies quickly. We had to do a mixture, right? And that's once again the thoughtful design. Where if we have a natural material, we were talking yesterday, is we put something around maybe the elevator lift to kind of integrate the design through to help set that up. I do think it's a guest perception, really. At the end of the day, I think I saw in the comments about carpets versus LVT. That's for me, it feels cleaner. Right, and guests are going to go to properties where they feel like they're safe, and also that the staff can be supported to clean the room properly. I think there's going to be a lot of vendors out there and suppliers they're phenomenal. Our partners, they're constantly pushing new product. And you look at Scotch Guard or fire retardant things back 20, 30 years ago, we'll start seeing those items come forth now as we move forward that can be built to help resist something like this along the way. But at the end of the day, I don't see a fundamental change like we're going to change all the surfaces. It's not, we're always thinking operational anyways from a point of view of cleanliness.
Excellent. Thank you, James, for that. And I just want to add, on the sustainability tip, environmental product declarations will become a requirement, I feel, as we look at how our materials are made, not just the type of material, but how they're made, how they're manufactured, where they're coming from, their exposure level from their manufacturing process, and how they're, being created before they even reach our doorstep. And then also how we're being disposed of. We're going to look for those kind of full circle requirements in design specifications when we're looking at a lot of these different types of materials. So I think that's also. I want to jump a little bit into the spa space. Actually, before we leave the room, Prem had a question more so about IRD spaces to be increased as more and more guests want to dine in the room. Does anybody have a take on that? I'm not sure. Do you think IRD spaces to be increased, in-room dining spaces to be increased from a room?
I think it goes back to flexibility. You know, we're designing a hotel in Riyadh, which is a W hotel, and it's about the whole room is zoned into different areas, from the what areas to the social area to the dressing area, and providing flexibility. You know, where that you can dine in your room comfortably. And I would agree. Yes, I think that's going to be increased in the near term, and there's going to be people that are going to remember this very vividly, you know, for the long term. You know, I think we, as human beings, we do have some sort of resiliency and a short-term memory a lot of times, but those people are going to travel in a different way. And providing that opportunity for in-room dining, and providing the surfaces and the space to allow that to happen, I think it's going to be an important.
I agree. Now I want to move a little bit more into the spa and how, you know, that's going to be changing or looking to adapt. Vivianne, massage is based upon deep physical contact. How is the design of the spa going to be able to respond to people's concerns about social distancing? And then I also have a follow-up question for you from Nikhil. But just give us your general thoughts on spa and treatments in this era of physical distancing, I should say.
I think for the short term in my current projects, obviously we're establishing screens for the reception desk, and we might see that the communal areas will be placed on hold. Classes to the outside area and to nature, fitness centers might remain closed for some time. And in regards to in the treatment, I do foresee the therapist and the client wearing masks. First 3 months after we reopen. And some of my projects I'm creating new protocols that are more Thai, shiatsu, stretching based, where the guests can actually wear a pajama during the treatment. So there's no skin to skin contact. After the treatment, they take off their pajama and off they go after their massage. Also working with some partners in creating some new tools, moving away from the normal hot stones into maybe some massage tools that are made of copper and silver, materials that really don't transmit the disease. That's in the short term. I think in the long term, just looking at spa design in general, you know, rounded corners are easier to clean. Looking at the slope in the thermal areas to ensure that water's not pooling. Really putting radiating heat at the forefront to ensure that everything stays dry and tidy. You know, looking at the waterproofing throughout all the areas, and I think the sauna is really going to take center stage. One of my partners from Germany, Klaus, that produces these beautiful saunas, they're putting a lot of research and money behind medical studies as to the benefits of the sauna and steam, not just for the immune system, but the fact that the virus actually can't live inside of these cabins. So that'll be one of the areas where people will be able to come in and enjoy in a more communal basis.
Had a question for you, Vivianne, mainly about, I think it was echoing the sentiments of robotics entering the spa space, replacing therapists.
It's funny because robotics have already entered the medical community, right? A lot of doctors are doing surgery through robots, but there's still a doctor behind it managing the robot and ensuring that everything's going according to plan. You know, personally, as a therapist myself, I wholeheartedly believe that people will go back to hands-on massage, you know, that connection with the human being and the touch of the skin, and that, you know, really energetic connection is so integral to the spa experience. But furthermore, from an anatomical and physiologically level, as a therapist, when I'm massaging, I'm looking at the skin. You know, is this person dry? Are there any hematomas that I have to avoid? You know, are there any varicose veins? Are there any laxity in the skin? There's bruising. I have to be able to see the skin to be able to treat the person accordingly. There's a lot of contraindications when it comes to contraindications and indications when it comes to the massage. And I don't see how a robot can actually assess that at the current time being.
Thank you, Vivianne, for that insight. We're coming up against time, but I'm understanding that we can go a bit over. If we'd like. I know someone mentioned about air quality. You know, the WELL standard speaks to air quality, and integrating those certifications or those criteria into our design is always great. There's a new one out, also Reset, that looks specifically at air quality, and HV purifying the air is going to be one of the more immediate focuses as people come back into going into spaces. So those are great resources for you to check out as well. let's go ahead and, I mean, I know we're past our 45 minutes, but this is such a great discussion and we have so many wonderful questions. I would like to understand applying the logic of social distancing to a cafe, because we did have some questions in the chat about food and beverage. We probably won't get too much to your design of food and beverage specifically, Amir, but more so on decreasing the occupancy to about 30% of its previous levels and making it work financially, looking at food and beverage and how that's going to take shape in the hotel industry and how we design, and from more of a financial standpoint. Tim and Vivian, I know you have some thoughts on that. Tim, if you could let us know what your thoughts are in terms of applying social distance, with 30%. What's the financial? How will we make this work?
A tough one. I mean, because literally, the hotels have been relying on turnover of seats to actually make their revenue. So, the options are somewhat limited. And also trying to create the environment that, because the option is, okay, you maintain the density and you put some sort. I mean, I think creative in creating, I guess, almost like it's almost going back to the booths, but enclosures that will allow the sense of separation and the physical separation. But obviously, we don't want to be sitting in an environment divided by plexiglass screens. It all has to be done in a way that still sells the ambience, because the dining is okay, it's getting fed, but it's really the success of dining is also partly the theatrical experience, is creating the environment that celebrates food. So we need to do it in a way that still maintains some level of density, but allows people to feel as though they have their defensible space. And it's back to the challenge of, obviously, how many of us have been in the supermarket and stood behind our little bits of tape on the floor, and yeah, that's fine, that works okay in the supermarket, but it doesn't work so well when you're having to tape out areas of a restaurant or areas of a reception. It all has to be done in a way where we can do all of this subliminally for the guests, so that they automatically feel that defensible space, or that sense of space, their own personal space, but also allows them it allows the ambience to be created. And what do you do? If you in the short term you say, okay, I do every other table. What are we going to do with that space between the two? What happens to that empty, or what was an empty table, or suddenly create a space? So yeah, I think it is a really exciting challenge that from a designer's point of view, and I'd love to hear James's comment on this as well, because how we can do this creatively to really create the ambience that is needed. And
if I could figure that out really quickly, Tim, I'd probably be very wealthy in a way that.
Sorry, catch that monkey. Yeah.
Well, no, I think you got to look at the whole spectrum, right? So I think a lot of the hotels that are focused on the millennial generation, or that kind of traveler, where there's a lot of communal tables. I think like the Rove hotels in Dubai, where big communal tables and that push for communal dining, and which has been great, but it puts you very close to a lot of people very quickly. And how do you take a property like that versus a fine dining restaurant where there was more of a quiet atmosphere and more sectioning and things along those lines? So there's some challenges depending on the food and beverage brief. One thing is to look at, I think in the near term, is how do you create, look at layouts and refine layouts, and then put in movable partitions in a way, not in how you would think of a movable partition, but creating barriers with, it could be landscape, it could be built environments that look decent, that create a private dining experience. I mean, if you go to Asia, throughout China, private dining is such a natural part of a restaurant dining experience, especially for the Chinese restaurant. The PDRs are great, and those create a bubble really at the end of the day. So I think there's and this could be a little bit more avant-garde. I'm not sure if it worked, but how do you take a restaurant during the course of a day and reduce the occupancy, like Tim says, but make it profitable? Which means you have to activate the asset all day. So you can't have a fine dining restaurant that's open at 30% capacity for 5 to 6 hours. So how do we activate the asset all day at a reduced capacity, but still increase the volume along the way? So I think restaurants will have to be more flexible. How do we brand them differently during different parts of the day? These are things that are done in airports sometimes, where you go in and in the morning it's a breakfast restaurant, and then with great digital signage, it flips to a different restaurant at a seafood restaurant at nighttime. So I think there's different ways we can kind of work through it, but food and beverage consultants and operators are going to have to be, we're going to have to work hard to try to find ways to create social distancing. I think one last thing is I saw this great picture of these little greenhouses. I'm sure everybody saw it for dining. And that's a cool idea. You'd want to sit in that. It might get a little warm if it's a sunny day, but you'd want to sit there. So I think there's some neat ideas that we can create design versus the plexiglass that goes right in front of us.
I agree. Thank you so much, James. I do have one more question specifically for you, James, because I know you have a take on this. It comes from Vivianne. I know you have some thoughts on this as well. Do you consider that there are any particular hotel brand that is better prepared for the after COVID guest? James, I know you had some take on brands and what this means. Would you mind giving us your thoughts on that?
For consumption, as a consumer, I would say that I think brands in general are better prepared because there's going to be the trust factor for brands again, right? I love going to independent hotels, but at the end of the day, is that property, does they do a good job sanitizing? Do they have standards in place? And that's going to be hard to find out through TripAdvisor or some sort of third-party application. It might be there, but you're going to want to go to a brand that, and the big brands have already pushed out their policies, such as, not to give a plug to Hilton, but they've co-branded with Mayo Clinic and Lysol about their cleaning process. And that provides me as a consumer a sense of comfort that they have a plan. And I think that's going to position brands to be above independence. I'm not sure if I answered Jose's question. I do think that, Hilton's, I love the co-branding idea of Hilton and how they're attacking that. But I think it's going to be, all the brands are going to probably push that way and probably be prepared. So I think it's more of brands are probably going to get a bump versus independence in this near term.
So guys, wrapping it up, let's go forward with our big takeaways from this wonderful discussion. And again, to my attendees, if you guys have not gotten your questions answered, I do ask that you please make sure that you network with us. We're going to go through our big takeaways, and we're going to start with Tim first, please.
I think the big takeaway is that there are short-term fixes that we have to activate until the immediate challenges of COVID are addressed, and we move into this post-COVID world. And then there are the longer-term impacts, which we as designers need to reshape as long-term benefits for the hotel operations and the guest experience. So it's the great catalyst for positive change. And I think that's something that hopefully we can celebrate. So we have to get in the mind of the guest, both kind of emotionally and psychologically, and really use this opportunity to creatively offer new, safe ways for comfortable social connection, particularly in the public spaces, and in turn find ways to provide that stage set, the setting to surprise and delight the guest, to provide them with this new guest experiential journey. So, everyone is looking for that experiential journey in their hotel stay, one way or another, and we can continue to celebrate that. And I think that's the challenge, is how do we do this in a way that makes people feel safe? We will get over this, as Ian Schrager was saying, we will come out the other side of this. There will be changes. Yeah, there'll be changes in the way we live. But in the end result, let's make those changes really positive and not just a solution.
Yeah, and the only thing consistent is change, right? Vivianne, I'd love to hear your big takeaways and final thoughts before we wrap up. And then James, please do.
Again, I just think that wellness will become more and more and more important as people are really looking for prevention, which is at the key. It's keeping ourselves healthy and keeping the planet healthy. As I said from the beginning, it's fixing the biology. So we can all go back to our daily lives and to be able to hug our family members. And I think, like we were mentioning, the brands will really come at the forefront. As a hotelier, luxury hotelier myself, brands like Peninsula and Mandarin on a Berge that for many years have kept very tidy back of house areas and very strict protocols, big corporate security entities. They will instill that confidence with the travelers, and people will go back. We also, as human beings, have the amazing ability to adapt and short-term memory. So I'm very confident, together with my fellow hoteliers, that the industry will come back stronger than ever.
Yeah, I think that we're all optimistic, and I think travel will come back. As we all know, we have that need and to connect. At the end of the day, I think our challenge as designers is that we don't forget. We push our developer partners and friends about how do we do things in a thoughtful way as we move forward and keep laying the foundation. Hopefully this doesn't come in our lifetime again, but we'll probably have something along the way. And I think you look at what happened in Asia with SARS, and how great they bounced back and are successful, and they were prepared a little bit better. And I think that gives us this opportunity, which we can seize, as we look at planning, we look at flexibility, and really, I also think some of these things can be profitable, for hotels as we think about great design, creating that experience, but also making them, a more successful environment when the guests do come.
So we've heard our big takeaways have been challenge, and they're a catalyst, and we must maintain to stay in the mindset of the guest as always. And I love this: preservation is key. Vivianne, that is great. That's wonderful. We only have one world, and definitely looking at ways that we can prevent before we have to react. That's the whole point of resiliency, and that's where those SDG guidelines and goals come into play. And then the need to connect, as James said, we must not forget as designers, and push our developer and all of our partners together. So with that, team, I'd like to thank my panelists. You guys have been great. This has been a wonderful conversation. Attendees, we can always keep the conversation going at the booth, which is the virtual booth with OBMI. And also a little tout from myself, the new normal of design and tourism will be here from COVID-19. And I would love for you guys to check out my podcast, justtaaad.com. That's JUSTAAD. I'll put it in the comments. We will be talking about the effects, the new face of tourism, and then our next series will focus on the new face of design, as well as we look at what's happening during COVID-19 and post-COVID-19, because we're all hospitality, tourism, and travel lovers, and we know that our industry is being affected very much by this. So check that out to get more information, and I will be interviewing all of these amazing panelists in more depth to answer a lot more of your questions. So again, attendees, thank you so much for your time and attention. It's the one thing we cannot get back. I'm happy that you shared it and spent it with us. To my panelists, wonderful, amazing insights. Thank you so much. And we're signing off. Thank you again so much. Have a wonderful day, and please stay safe and healthy.